5 diseases that were once completely misunderstood. Doctors used to treat these deadly diseases in absolutely horrible ways because they were once completely misunderstood. New information on how HIV/AIDS originally arrived in the United States has undermined the long-held belief that the 1980s pandemic was centered on a single guy, dubbed Patient Zero in academic literature. 30 years later, it is revealed that the man known as Patient Zero never existed. The designation on his file was the letter O, indicating that he was from outside California, the state where experts believe the issue began. Indeed, the concept of Patient Zero arose from a mistake. That isn't the first time medicine has gotten an origin story wrong. It looks that science has a history of getting things wrong the first time, and a lot of that has to do with the role of existing belief sets and preconceptions. Here are 5 more deadly illnesses whose beginnings medical specialists completely misunderstood. Number 1. Syphilis. Both the plague and what we now call syphilis were known as pestilence in the ancient world because they traveled swiftly, swamped communities with mortality and disfigurement, and perplexed medical specialists whose humoral ideas couldn't explain the diseases away. By the late 1400s, when Christopher Columbus and his crew of sailors claimed to have brought syphilis, the French disease, as it would eventually become called to Europe, it was clear that it was transmitted sexually, and eventually, the authorities determined that women, primarily women of ill repute or prostitutes, carried the disease. While current medical research had a grip on the route of transmission, societal and institutional misogyny continued to hold that women were the source of all venereal illness, including syphilis. Long into the 20th century, in both Europe and the United States, this consensus played a significant influence in how specialists presented syphilis to the public and advocated that the public resist such a disease. Indeed, authorities advised female sex workers to keep clean, but not males who wanted their services. This consensus permeated the lab room. Physicians would experiment on hospitalized prostitutes with syphilis in order to discover therapies for the condition, which frequently included mercury dosages. One attempt at syphilization proposed that the illness might be immunized against in the same way as smallpox is. As a result, doctors injected prostitutes with syphilis on a frequent basis during the mid-19th century in the expectation that they would develop immunity. The difficulty was that many, if not most, of the women they experimented on already had syphilis, thus their findings were questionable. Number 2. Cancer. The many malignancies have confused and continue to baffle medical specialists, particularly those that prove deadly despite vigorous medical care. This confusion dates back to ancient Greece, when religious factions forbade any investigation of the human body after death. This, along with a clear absence of devices such as the microscope, left individuals interested in medicine with a very limited understanding of what the inside of the human body looked like. All of this helps to explain why Hippocrates, the father of medicine, claimed that cancer was caused by bad humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile were the 4 basic fluids of the body. Hippocrates believed that too much black bile caused cancer, and because actual medical research could not be practiced, these explanations survived for what appears to be a remarkably long period today. Through the 1700s, cancer etiology hypotheses involving another body fluid, lymph, persisted. It should be noted, however, that the idea that physiological fluids may run wild and cause cancer was not entirely beyond of the realm of possibility, because these early medical experts couldn't see what was going on at the microscopic level. They only reported what was immediately visible to the human eye. In reality, the signs and symptoms of cancer, which are caused by abnormal and dangerous cellular proliferation, led them to conclude that something, somewhere, was growing out of control. But it wasn't until the 19th century, with the invention of the modern microscope that the ancients didn't have, that we not only got a more comprehensive understanding of how cancer works, but also began to build therapies to limit its progression. Number 3. Epilepsy. Seizures, like cancer, have existed throughout human history. Seizures can happen to everyone and for a variety of causes. Those suffering with epilepsy, on the other hand, may have seizures on a regular basis and may experience a variety of them. Grand mal seizures are the most well-known because they are so apparent. These seizures are characterized by tonic-clonic jerking motions of the limbs and head, as well as a shift in awareness. Because of these seizures, both legitimate and illegitimate medical experts were able to combine epilepsy with demonic possession long into modernity. This confusion may have arisen with the Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans, all of whom attributed sacred importance to what we now call seizure activity. These early religious beliefs thought that the afflicted had been possessed by demons and that God was punishing the individual for it. The fear of demonic possession and God's wrath was so deeply ingrained in ancient communities that epileptics were separated, ostracized, and subjected to what we would consider gruesome treatment today. Indeed, early treatments created by the Romans featured the patient drinking the blood of fallen gladiators and eating corpse meat, with these rites inspiring subsequent exorcisms. Number 4. Tuberculosis. Although the discovery of germ theory brought much needed insights into the feared respiratory illness TB, specialists referred to the condition as consumption in the early 19th century and beyond. Experts indicated that consumption was mostly driven by sorrowful emotions, a grieved mental and emotional condition they linked to the world's fast changes at the time. As a result, the disease's explanation focused mostly on increased urbanization and industrialization. According to experts, crowded streets and increased pollution levels expose individuals to respiratory infections, later discovered to be caused by tuberculosis, which actually consumed them due to how powerful and pervasive urban filth was. Other pervasive notions from French physicians argued that illnesses like TB were inherent in a person. The sickness simply came with the territory. However, physicians recognized that the growing disagreeable aspects of urban life would not help anyone's health and, at the absolute least, may lead to someone spiral into consuming. True, city living may have rendered individuals more susceptible to TB, but only in the sense that it exposed them to more germs, not because a morally degraded society left them breathless with unhappiness. Soon after, germ theory, which gained a foothold in modern medicine in the late 19th century, was able to better explain the transmission of conditions like tuberculosis. And this, combined with increased hygiene and sanitation practices, led to its decline, and the advent of penicillin nearly eradicated it in the following century. Number 5. Leprosy. Leprosy is one of the most horribly misunderstood illnesses in history. Like many diseases before it, medical practitioners first thought it was either hereditary or a sort of retribution manifested as ugliness. In any case, lepers were ostracized, confined, and exiled to leper colonies, the most famous of which was on the Hawaiian island of Molokai, where they would spend the rest of their lives in isolation. Unlike certain diseases that were thought to be God's judgment at the time, the stigma associated with leprosy persisted long after researchers uncovered its biological origin. Because people were so afraid of contracting leprosy, some European towns even sounded bells to warn inhabitants that a person with the disease was close, allowing them to avoid walking in the afflicted's path. Isolation continued even as knowledge of the disease and its treatment improved. Sufferers were hauled off to sanitarium hospitals or whole colonies for treatment, and many of them would spend the remainder of their lives apart from the rest of society. Today, a few persons who were banished to Molokai in the 1960s remain on the island, the great majority of whom are native Hawaiians. Even after the quarantine was lifted, more than a dozen people remain in the leper colony known as Kalapapa. Over the course of a century, it is estimated that as many as 8,000 persons were brought there beginning in the 1860s. In an ongoing attempt to destigmatize the ailment, doctors now call it Hansen's disease. Doctors currently believe that as much as 95% of the population is naturally resistant to leprosy, and that if one does get it, it is more likely to be from an armadillo than a fellow human. Though immunity to the bacterium appears to have developed, it still affects up to 250,000 individuals worldwide each year and causes deformity, including limb loss and blindness. While modern medicine has achieved enormous advances in recent decades, many diseases whose roots have finally been discovered still lack conclusive therapy and cure. While we look back on millennia of misinterpretation and wonder how our forefathers could have been so wrong, we should remember that future generations may look back at us and wonder why we couldn't see the answers to medicine's biggest mysteries, which may have been right in front of us all along.